spent almost a decade in various roles on the manufacturing side of the food industry. 4 years ago, he decided to make the leap into consulting with the idea of trying to help people in the food industry from CPG to manufacturers, farm to table. He is now a co-founder and senior partner in Whole Brain Consulting. And so let's welcome Brandon to the Escabona Pavilion stage.
Afternoon. Hope everybody's having a good Escabona. My name is Brandon Hernandez. I am a co-founder in Whole Brain Consulting. The subject I'm here to talk about today is about what spec development for both finished goods and raw material as you're developing ideation and with the anticipation of taking it into large-scale food manufacturing, whether that's your own manufacturing or a co-packing situation. Some of the things that we'll discuss today that are critical is how to plan and formulate so that you can hit the ground running. We deal with a lot of CPG brands that they start out with an idea, it's in their kitchen, and then when it comes time to take that to manufacturing, it falls short because they haven't collected the appropriate amount of information to help the co-packer and ease them into that transition, and thereby it extends the timeline for getting your product to market and for helping ultimately your manufacturer understand what it is you expect from them and the product that you expect coming out of it. So what to consider just in pre-development, what is your call out on the package going to be? If you're going to be kosher, are you going to be organic, vegan? Those are all things that'll play into how you develop, what forms of protein you plan to use, where you plan to get them. So make sure that you understand from an ingredient perspective what it is you're going to be after. Early stage development oftentimes will take the aid of a broker as opposed to going directly to an ingredient supplier, simply because the broker has the opportunity to sell it to you in smaller quantities. The downside to using a broker is that oftentimes they aren't necessarily value add, they're simply spot buying particular material on the market and then shipping you whatever was cheapest to them at the time. So the table salt that you got before with the Cargill packaging label on it might be something completely different the next time you order it. And so understanding and getting the raw material specifications from all your suppliers as you're developing becomes key, because as you develop and as you go to source new material, you take that spec sheet with you and you say, I need this, I need whatever I'm going to have, it has to match whatever is on this specification. Because if it changes and there's variability in the ingredients, your manufacturer will have a harder time making that work. Second, critical factors to document and to consider when you're formulating your product prior to taking it to manufacture is how do you intend to scale the process? You have to be able to, at least in your own manufacturing setting, whether it's your kitchen or your commercial kitchen or wherever you're doing your R&D, write the steps down, how you do things, dwell times, like how long do you heat something. There's a myriad of brands that we deal with that from day one never wrote it down. It was just grandma's 100-year-old recipe. It was what she taught them. And so writing things down is critical so that your manufacturer knows, okay, this is what you expect, this is what my equipment can do. Those are often two very dissimilar things that you need to be able to help guide them on, because while they may be good as a manufacturer, they're not good in your product specifically. It's your job to teach them what your product is. Also, what the end use is going to be as you're developing your finished product spec for the manufacturer is it going to be refrigerated, shelf stable, does it need to be frozen? These are all critical factors, not only for your manufacturer, but it will help guide what manufacturer you go to. Because if you go to a shelf stable producer, expecting a frozen product. Sometimes that doesn't work for them. And so you have to be able to, again, guide them into what your expectations are. So we talked a little bit earlier about the processing guide. Also, as you're ideating and maybe you begin to engage an R&D house to help you finalize or commercialize the formula, it's critical to know what your macronutrients are going to be, what your targets, because that will also, from a fat, carb, protein standpoint, that will also drive, do I use a protein isolate or do I just use a standard whey protein off the shelf? There's an expense and drawback to the uses and non-uses of certain material. Documenting that as you go and what your expectations are not only help, again, it will help you transition it to a co-packer, it'll also help you in commercialization understand the end target for the product. While you're collecting supplier data, so something that will ease the transition into co-packing is, as you're requesting raw material from different ingredient houses or brokers, request the spec sheet, request some of the documentation. If you're organic, request their organic certification for that product. If any co-packer you go to is going to need them to have a food safety cert of some kind, start collecting that data, because then as you transition to the co-packer, you hand them a packet of material and say, use this. You don't leave it for them to try and have to find it. And if you don't have a spec sheet or the appropriate materials, the other issue can be that they go to find something, and let's say you're using tabletop pepper, and they go out and they source, 50 mesh. And those are all things that they wouldn't intentionally do, other than the fact that you haven't driven them through that process and guided them through it, that this is the specific things that you wanted to be used in your product because it gives you the texture at the end or a specific flavor profile that you're looking for. So you have to help guide them through that. Now, once your formulas, you have a final formula, you need to not only write the percentages of each ingredient as well as the processing guide, but that's where you can start to you can start to formulate with a master case supplier, cardboard corrugate supplier, what your master case is going to look like, what your pallet stacks are going to be. Again, these are all critical factors to ease and to expedite the transition into manufacturing. It makes it easier for them to understand specifically what it is that you need them to do, because as you go out and sell into distribution, this is how your distributors are going to expect to get it. And then finally, as you're developing a final finished good spec for your finished product, you want to take into consideration your flavor profiles, your textures. Write those things down. Do you expect it to be burnt? Do you expect it to have some smoky notes? Do you expect it to be a salty finish? Those are things that your co-packer, as they're producing it, they will try the product, and it helps guide them into making the product that you're paying for. What's the final smell? What colors do you expect? You can circumvent a lot of color issues by going down to Lowe's and pulling paint chip and making a processing guide that these are the colors that I expect out of my finished product. And it helps your co-packer understand what they're supposed to produce for you. And then any critical QA, QC information that you could get for them, water activity, finished moisture, pH, acidity, target salt percentage, any of those things that you can begin to collect ahead of time, again, eases that transition to the co-packer and gives them the roadmap for producing your material. Things that will frustrate you when scaling and things you need to know. Large-scale manufacturers are not a test kitchen. And unfortunately, as you scale and lines are built, the equipment functions within a certain range, but it's not one of those deals where I just can alter a process overnight because a texture comes out wrong, or a flavor profile comes out wrong. Your processing guides and finished specs should also include what your strike zone is for the finished product. And I always advise brands, get your gold standards together, even if you make them yourself. What is the best A-plus product that can be produced? And then continually, once a quarter, give feedback to your co-packer, your manufacturer. Give them the gold standards. Hey, I need you to recalibrate your text with the gold standard consistently, because unintentionally, even human beings that try it every day, they begin to lose sight of what the true target was. So having gold standards to provide to them on a consistent basis will help them to make repeatability of experience for your end customers as they're trying. And then finally, once all that's developed, I know that's the short road to a long answer, but the development's complete, and now it's time to go and find the co-packer. And so things to consider as you're going to find your co-packer, besides the gold standard and the processing guide and the raw materials that you ultimately will provide to them. You also want to consider the geographic location of your manufacturer, which will play into your distribution. Be prepared to find somebody that is in your Goldilocks zone from a manufacturing perspective, because you can always split your manufacturing later. We have a lot of clients that get in with manufacturers that are way too big for them, and then it's hard to scale because their minimum order quantities that they require become just too cumbersome for the business to handle. And then if you feel, there's something that we advise, because QA, QC is always the inroad for this, is that if you feel like you need to be at every single manufacturing run because they never get it right, you're probably at the wrong manufacturer. So just some examples of things to think about as you're formulating, a high-fat bar versus a standard bar. Think a Laura bar versus a keto bar. There are very specific things and very specific pieces of equipment that need to run those two individual things. Drink formulation. Do you want to be a shelf-stable drink? Do you want to be a refrigerated drink? Where do you want to appear? Again, those drive critical factors in where you will go for manufacturing, and it also drives critical factors for how you plan to develop your finished product. And then clean label. Just clean label is big right now, but the available biological controls from a shelf stability standpoint, from an ingredient stability standpoint, especially in liquid formats, is difficult. So it's not impossible, but have an open mind in the clean label space, because it does become cumbersome to transition to a co-packer without specialized equipment. Our quick shameless plug, Whole Brain Consulting does QA, QC, supply chain, co-man source and selection, logistics and R&D. If you have any questions after this, you can email me. We can talk after. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon. Wonderful. So we have a little bit of a break before our next speaker. Our next speaker will come at 2:30. So be sure you swing by the pavilion again at that time, okay? Thank you.